So when you're ready to build the fire, one of the most important things is the site you select to build that fire. The situation is obviously going to kind of dictate this. Is it a true survival situation where you're literally just trying to squirrel away under the first bit of shelter? Is this a situation where maybe, you're out overnight breaking down a bull, and you're just gonna ride the night out there next to the animal before you hike back to your camp? So that situation is going to kind of depend on the site, but the site is important. You want a site that is going to be somewhat sheltered from the wind. We do need that airflow, but you want something that's a little sheltered. You have to take into consideration, if it's a survival situation, do you want to be seen? If you make this fire, do you want it to be visible? Or do you want it to be more secluded? So, all those things you kind of have to take into consideration. This site here, it's a little secluded. I've got this rock wall here. So this rock wall is really important. I'm going to use this as what's called a reflector wall. So I'm going to build my fire here, and that heat's going to hit that wall and reflect back to me on this side of the fire. So, if you can find a natural reflector wall, that's amazing. If not, you can certainly build one, but it's something to really consider to try to get the most efficiency, out of that fire. If you're trying to get warmth, it's really important to have some type of reflector wall. The next thing is, what's the intent of the fire? What am I trying to do? Is it just, I'm going to build it in the middle of the day and ride out a rainstorm, have lunch and brew up some coffee with a buddy? Am I building this fire to cook with? Or am I building this fire to warm a shelter? I've got a tarp set up here that I'm going to get underneath. It's been kind of snowing and raining all day. I've got my area for the fire identified, and I've got my reflector wall. That having that shelter built, having that reflector wall, kind of having that all prepared before you actually build the fire, then gives you the ability to identify where I can build the fire. Do I have some egress away from the shelter? Is that fire going to, provide the warmth I want with the reflector wall? Wind's kind of a tough one. You can always guess prevailing wind, but as soon as you guess it, it's going to switch on you almost guaranteed. But you want to do all that, and then you want to go and start collecting your wood. So, as a general rule, they say, collect 4 or 5 times more than you need. I would just say, make sure you collect a shit ton of wood, especially if it's going into night. That's the last thing you want to do, is be walking into the dark to try to collect and find firewood. You want to do that during the daylight. So you want to bring that firewood in. You want to have enough to kind of at least get you through the night, or at least get you through the storm. And then you want to start to process that. So, what kind of wood we're looking for is called standing deadwood. And standing deadwood is basically trees and vegetation that are dead, that are not laying directly on the ground. We've had a lot of rain in the last few days. A lot of stuff that's laying on the ground is going to be wet. If it's been there all winter, it's really going to be saturated. So we want to try to find wood that's up off the ground, dead trees that have fallen over, maybe not laid all the way down on the ground. That's where we want to try to collect our wood. And then we want to bring that wood, in and kind of start to organize it. There's different kinds of wood. So the tinder, is this nucleus that starts the fire. And that's, I've brought that into the field. But then I need to start producing, small wood, called kindling, and then slowly, larger and larger and larger pieces until we get to something maybe, this big around or more. It really depends on the environment you're in and how much you're going to be able to find and collect. Now, if you have a saw, maybe you have a small bone saw if you're hunting, that helps procure that wood. It's not mandatory, but it is going to help. It's going to make it maybe a little quicker and more efficient. But if you don't have a saw, you can certainly do, all this wood collection and prep, on your own. So, if you are able to score a piece of wood, you know, that's around like this and it's big, you know, it's gonna take a long time to get a hot enough fire to start burning pieces of wood like this. And if I need kindling, because I can't find some natural small sticks, then that's where the knife comes in. And so this is a 4-inch blade on this knife, and I've got what I call a baton. So this is just a nice, dense, heavy piece of wood that I picked up and was able to procure. And batoning wood is really the safest method to take a large piece of wood and whittle it down to kindling. And if this wood is wet on the outside, I'm able to baton down and get to the dry core in the center. Now, I am not a proponent of hatchets in the backcountry. I had one friend pretty much cut his thumb off after he gotten dropped off by a float plane. Luckily, they were able to re-divert that plane back to them. But, you know, hatchets, you want to kind of do this. And with batoning, I'm just going to put this piece of wood on a rock, a firm piece of ground. I'm going to place the blade here, make sure it's pointing out the other side, and just literally baton down the wood just like that, okay? And then you can just start working your way all the way around. Now this 4-inch blade is going to allow me to go and baton all this wood and get it to the point where it's kindling. You know, I like to, prep my site, prep my wood, have everything ready before I get ready to start. And then as opposed to just having a piece of tinder on the ground and throwing a bunch of sticks on top like this, that will work when it's very dry out, but that is not going to find you success when the conditions are poor. So there's essentially 2 ways to go about it. And you can either use a brace method where you put a stick down like that, you place a piece of tinder, and then you can start placing kindling on top like this. And so that gives that kindling, that tinder a standoff so that there's some airflow. And the other way is to build a log cabin where you basically start to crosshatch sticks, etc., and place the tinder in the center, you light it, and then continue to, so to speak, put a roof on the log cabin. Those are both going to do a couple things. They're going to promote airflow, they're going to give you structure, and they're going to allow you to build the fire and not just have wood fall down on the tinder and put it out, because, you know, some of these tinders could be very fragile, especially if we're using, natural tinder like, moss or something like that. The other thing is, before you start the fire, you know, we have our shelter, we have our reflector wall. We want to make sure what size fire we want, what shape we want. You know, do we want this a long fire to heat a couple people in a shelter, or do we just want a round fire because we're going to stand around it and kind of socialize? But all those things are kind of important, before you go ahead and approach this. So, I've got some prefab tinder here, and I've got the cigar lighter. So I'm going to go ahead. I've got my site prepped. I'm going to make sure I've got my kindling, my tinder, my kindling, and then progressively larger pieces of wood up until maybe I have some rounds. And I want to make sure that I've got that all there, because once I start this, I don't want to walk away to go get more wood to come back, because that's when the fire goes out. That's when the fire gets out of control and potentially, starts burning down the environment. So we want to be very careful about that. But, this kindling is, we'll call it pencil to, finger size, something like that. I baton this down to the dry core from that round. And so I'm just going to kind of pick the smallest pieces. I'm going to do this crosshatch again. And, one of the reasons I like this cigarette lighter is because it allows me to start to do this and kind of get it going, and I can direct the flame. So now that I've kind of got everything where I want, I've got my wood, I'm kind of ready. I'm going to go ahead and light this. And as soon as this is lit, we're kind of committed. So you have to start paying attention. You have to start feeding this fire and constantly just give it what it needs. So we want to make sure that we remember the fire triangle. So the three things that a fire needs are fuel, heat, and then oxygen. So if we start to have a problem with this fire, one of those three things is not being provided in enough capacity to kind of get this going. Don't be afraid, if you need to blow on the fire a little bit. That'll help kind of get it going. But you also want to be very careful when you have this tinder, depending on what it is. If you blow too hard to provide too much airflow, you could actually put the fire out. So if you have some bigger pieces of wood that are wet, you know, you can kind of bring those and start setting them around. And as we get this fire going and we start producing heat, we're going to start drying out some of these rounds. That's going to help us, you know, later on when we get ready to put those, you know, on the fire, you know, as it gets enough heat and we want to start, you know, stoking this up and building it out for whatever purposes we're trying to achieve. So we're just gonna kind of let this go. You know, right now it's kind of in its kind of critical stage. So it's got to develop that heat. You have to keep providing that fuel, and you have to make sure that it's got enough airflow. You know, it's tough sometimes when the weather's kind of nasty, that you want to kind of protect this fire, and sometimes you can do it, you know, at the detriment of that fire by taking away the airflow that it really needs to kind of get it going. So then as this fire starts to go and the breeze is kind of moving the flame around, we can start, you know, to maybe start working towards a teepee, or we can start building out the log cabin farther around there. You know, it sounds obvious, but you want to place wood where there's flame. You know, you can't place it where you want it. You have to place it, you know, where it needs to be. And again, what that log cabin is doing in this case is it's bracing up above that tinder so that the weight of this wood is not going to fall down and potentially knock this fire out. So you can see once you provide that airflow, what it does, it really stokes this fire up, kind of gets some more heat in there, and it begins to ignite, you know, some of this wood that may be just, you know, a little damp. So there's conditions that are very sobering when you realize, you know, you can't build a fire in some conditions. The environment just conspires against you. The dew point's too high, the woods are too wet, even the types of wood. You know, you may spend more time and energy building the fire than you're actually going to get heat out of it. But, you know, one of the benefits is sometimes just the physical act of building the fire warms you up in the process. So by blowing on the fire, you're adding that airflow, you're adding that oxygen, and you're building up that heat. And that heat is allowing that fuel to catch fire, to dry out, to catch fire, you know, and continue to build heat so that we can continue to add, you know, larger and larger pieces, you know, as kind of the mass and the heat of this fire grows. So it's critical, you know, that you blow right down at the base, and you can see it. It's just like a bellows, you know, in a forge. It's going to just accelerate the intensity of the fire. So now that we have the fire established, you know, I'm feeling good about it. It's generated enough heat that it's starting to burn, you know, larger pieces of wood. I've got wood around it now that I'm starting to dry out, that is going to eventually feed this fire to make it bigger. But now's the time, you know, to go back and go, what's the intent of the fire? So if I'm gonna cook with this fire, you know, I'm gonna wanna let this burn down to coals. And that way I could either lay meat directly on the coals. You know, I can take flat rocks, I can place them on the coals, and I can put, you know, meat on that rock and cook it that way. Or obviously I could skewer meat, you know, and place it over the fire. If I've got the shelter behind me and this reflector wall, I'm going to want to start elongating this fire to get the most warmth I can tonight, either for myself laying down, or, you know, if me and my buddy are sitting next to each other. You know, I don't want a small fire, I want a large elongated fire so that I'm heated, you know, head to toe. You know, we're very used to fires being in circular fire pits because they're social gatherings and everyone's, you know, standing around talking. But, you know, in a survival situation, when I'm trying to get the most warmth, I want to make this long. I'm going to make this 6-8 feet long. I'm going to make it in front of my shelter. I've got my reflector wall to start bouncing that heat back. I've got my lanes of egress to get out of the shelter if, you know, the fire got out of control. But the other thing that allows me to do is when I start making this 6 feet long, as an example, I can start taking 6-foot long pieces of wood and feeding that into the fire, and now I'm not having to procure smaller pieces of wood, because 6-8 foot pieces of wood are enough. I can even drag, you know, a 20-foot small down tree here and just feed 6 feet in at a time, and as it burns I just feed 6 more. So I'm finding efficiency. I'm trying to save my energy, and I'm trying to get the most warmth out of this fire, you know, in this situation. But you have to decide what those, you know, what the intent of that fire is to kind of make the most use of it. So, you know, make sure that you're training, you know, in inclement weather. You know, it was raining hard yesterday and snowing. It was raining this morning a little bit. You know, it's not right now, but we want to go out in inclement weather and train. That builds confidence. It sharpens our skills. You know, it just provides that confidence to go, yeah, in the worst case scenario, you know, unless the situation environment is so bad, like, I can build a fire. I know how to do this. I've trained, I've practiced, you know, and this isn't going to be that big a deal. It's just going to be a great story to some point. The last thing is, make sure when you're doing this that, one, there's no fire restrictions. That's why springtime is a perfect training time to do this. Winter is another, of course, but you have to make sure that these fires are extinguished. You have to sit here, you have to start spreading this out. If you've got water, start pouring water on it. And you have to sit here and make sure that these fires are out, so that we're not burning, you know, our states down. You know, it's critical that when we're out here training that we're safe, not just for us, but, you know, for the environment we're in. So, you know, this has been a great, you know, segment that we've gone through on fire building. You know, keep these things into consideration, go out and train in realistic scenarios, and hopefully the next time you build a fire, it's for social reasons and not for survival.